Hi, everybody. This is Amanda Phillips coming to you from Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey House. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have Hillary Fayle with me. And she was really one of the first artists that we had after I came on board at Woodlawn. And Hillary hails from Richmond, and she not only graduated, but teaches at one of my favorite programs that I never attended myself, but got to visit at Virginia Commonwealth University, the materials and craft, I think I'm getting this right, craft and materials studies program. So she has been teaching there and has a BFA and MFA from there, and also a BFA in fiber, not surprisingly specializing, I think, in embroidery. Hillary creates these absolutely beautiful compositions by embroidering preserved and fresh leaves in a way that is pretty spectacular, as well as lots of other things since then. Say welcome, Hillary, to this Makers and Creators. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you. It's so nice to see you again,
Yeah, it's great.
although
It's
under weird circumstances.
I know it's not such great circumstances, but really wonderful ways. We're finding wonderful ways to connect, I think. But
Yeah.
so let's just start with, why needlework and how you began and where you got the inspiration for your work.
Okay, so starting at the very, very beginning, I think I was always really interested in making things with my hands, even as a little kid. My grandmother taught me how to knit, and I remember like just being terrible at that. And of course, now that's part of the curriculum that I teach at VCU, so it's kind of funny that it's all come full circle. But um, I always really was drawn to needlework, making little clothing for my dolls, like anything that sort of had to do with fabric or fiber, I was really into, even as a small child. And then I went to college. As you mentioned, I got my BFA in fiber design. And that was a little bit of I wasn't entirely sure at that point, being an 18-year-old who wasn't quite, um, certain about what the future was going to look like. I just made a decision that at the time didn't feel entirely well thought out to me, but it really did sort of set me on this path to do everything that I did. So I chose fiber design specifically as an 18-year-old going into college. And then I had an opportunity to study abroad when I was in my junior year at that point. So I went to United Kingdom and studied specifically embroidery. So up to that point, it was all the different things that you learn when you're going through a textiles program. And then I went and did this program in England that was just specifically embroidery, and it was kind of mind blowing at that point. Like I was just like, whoa, this is what I want to do. And so from that point on, I just became really fascinated with just stitching. And so again, I'll have to back up the story to when I was about 14 years old, and I went to summer camp in Western New York, which is where I grew up. And the summer camp was sort of themed around this idea of environmental conservation and learning about the environment. So that, like I knew that I was kind of an artist from a young age, but then when I went to that summer camp, that was another sort of pivotal point for me. And it sounds silly to say that, but looking back on it, I realized that it did also change the course of my life. So I went to camp. I was obsessed with this idea of, um, being a steward of the natural world and learning everything that I could about that, and thought, for a minute that I might actually go towards a career in biology or forestry or something along that path. And of course, I chose art, but it wasn't until I kind of came back from that experience in England with the needleworking that I figured out that I could marry the two in this really interesting way. So I was working at the summer camp as the camp cook, and I had some free time in between meals, and I kind of looked up and I realized like, oh, maybe, I wonder if I could just, there's this big oak tree and I was just thinking maybe I could stitch into the leaves and maybe that would work. And it totally did. So that's kind of what got me started on that. And that was years and years ago. And at that point, I had been working at the summer camp for about 10 years. So it was this, like long trajectory of getting to where I am now. But that's kind of how it all came together. And everything that I think I do is really under that umbrella of trying to create a connection to nature with the human hand. And the way that it makes sense for me to do that is through craft.
I think what is interesting to the audience at the show, seeing your work, about 1,200 people came through and saw these sort of stunning embroideries of leaves sewn together, and they really appreciated not just the stitching, but the idea behind the stitching for the first time. I think they hadn't really thought, oh yeah, this is needlework, this is neat, this is what we do, but in a very different sort of a different way of seeing it, I guess. How did you feel about exhibiting your fairly contemporary work in a lot of ways in sort of this iconic historic space? Was that different from other studio spaces you'd been in to that point?
Yeah, it absolutely was different, but I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to sort of engage with the history that's in the process. Like I'm working with these really historic processes and these stitch patterns that are traditional and go from generation to generation to generation, and we learn them by looking at the examples, the samplers, the books that we have from the past. So I think in being able to actually work and see the textile collection at Woodlawn, it was fantastic to just actually have that direct link to like this is stitchwork and patterning that existed here, and here I am using it. The same exact stitches, but in a very different and contemporary way. So I kind of love that ability to be able to pull something from history and just kind of inject it into today.
So I actually have a piece of yours. And so my next question, I'll put it up just so people can see it. These are ginkgo leaves that are sewn, can I do this properly? Sewn beautifully together.
Yeah, I can see it. I'm so glad you have that.
And it's very brown. It was very yellow, this piece, when I got it, as a typical ginkgo leaf might be if you found it on the ground. So, but I think to me, that's very much a part of what you're doing. The ephemeral nature of nature, matters to you in your process. So can you talk about that a little bit? That we shouldn't get anxious. The people shouldn't get anxious when they see that the leaves are perhaps changing, and the needlework, by the way, has not changed one little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's a little bit of the magic to it, is that, in having done this for a couple of years, I have figured out that certain leaves are more stable and how to stabilize leaves so that they'll last longer. But that's what it really is just kind of extending the natural life cycle. And I don't know, I have not obviously been around to see what really happens to these in 50 or 100 years, but looking to like herbariums, like we do have preserved and pressed plants that have lasted hundreds of years. So I mean, I think though it's an organic object and it has a life cycle, and we all have life cycles. And so I think the connection to it in that way is important to me, like thinking about nature and the natural world and this, circles of energy and just that's part of it. That's part of what this art is about for me.
So you've done a lot of things since I last saw you. You've been traveling the world and doing residencies. I think I'm right, in Italy, and been very busy. And not all of it has been about embroidering leaves. You've been getting into botanical blueprints and making fabulous murals and things like that. So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since we last saw you.
Oh my gosh. You're right. At that point, I think I might have been teaching at VCU, but now I'm doing that full time, in addition to having a studio practice. So that's new and great. Um, I am in the summertime. Typically, I would be teaching right now in Italy. I developed and run a study abroad class, which is so fun. It's so fantastic. That's an Italian craft and design class. And so I've taught at Penland School of Craft in North Carolina. And then the blueprints that you mentioned, I just started playing around with those a couple years ago, and they're sort of in the looking to historically Anna Atkins, who made the first cyanotype botanical prints. But I had this idea to try to catalog all of the plants in the neighborhood where I live here in Richmond, and so that's kind of what got this project started. But that turned into playing with the idea of arranging the plants in a specific way. And so that that project has evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years. But then I did this really fun iteration of it with the Albright Knox Gallery, and we ended up making a mural. But we did the mural was a collection of all the prints that the community in Buffalo made during the 25th annual garden walk. So it was a really fun project. People got to walk up and make a print and learn how to do it, and then they could make more than one, so they could take one with them and have a little piece of that for themselves. And then the all the prints were digitized, and then I arranged them, and then it went up as a mural. So that was like so
Great.
fun.
If you, if you were to tell, you've obviously got a lot of students, very talented group of students over there at VCU, and in your other classes. What do you like to tell them the most? What's the best piece of advice you think you give them each semester? What
Uh,
do you want them to know about being a maker and creative person?
it really depends on the day, but I feel like I have different advice for every day. But um, I feel like I honestly tell them, well, I don't know. I do feel like we talk a lot about being grateful, which is kind of a weird thing to say in this context, but I do really think that it's important to remember what you all have to be grateful for. Um, but also, I think in terms of like advice for a maker or creator is just be open to what possibilities exist. I think there's so much out there, and just kind of being open to it all is important.
Well, we look forward to seeing what's coming next. We wish you and all your students the very best, and we're so glad to connect with you again. And we hope to have you back soon doing something cool at Woodlawn again, because we really did the last time that we did. So thank you so much for being with us today. And everybody can see a little bit more about Hillary and her process if you tune in tomorrow and watch the video that we post there. Next week, as part of this series, we're not interviewing anybody because we're concentrating on the fact that it is our anniversary weekend for Frank Lloyd Wright's birthday, and we are going virtual with our very first virtual birthday party, and we're also celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Pope-Leighey house itself this year. And so that will be very much a part of our virtual event, which includes trivia and cocktail making and a costume contest. And all you cake makers out there, all your creative cake makers, get going, because we're going to be looking at all your cake decorating skills on Sunday, June 7th. So we hope people will join us then. The link is in our bio, of course. And thanks again, Hillary. Everybody tune in tomorrow to see Hillary's video. I think it's going to be a great one. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Amanda.